my personal perspective is anybody that uses cannabis is a patient in my eyes, which is why on any of our marketing material, which I'll never change, Tetragram was built for patients by patients. And that's the way we view it.
This is the Cannabis Enigma, cutting through the smoke to have informed, serious conversations for regular people.
Hey everyone, I'm Alana Goldberg, and I'm here for season 2 of the Cannabis Enigma Podcast with our scientific advisor, Dr. Cody Peterson.
Hi, Alana. New voice in the room. It's so great to see you. Yeah, and be part of this podcast. The Cannabis Enigma has been a listen of mine, and it's great to be on the other end of the microphone.
Yeah, you've even been interviewed on the podcast before in season 1.
Yeah, well, now the tides have turned.
Indeed. Actually, that was one of our most popular episodes, you should know. So very happy to have you on this side of the microphone. So Cody and I were just recently in Las Vegas for MJ BizCon. For those of you who don't know, this is the event of the cannabis industry, a massive industry conference in the Las Vegas Convention Center. Big is exactly what it is. Like Las Vegas, really. Big.
Yeah, big. There's like a theme in Las Vegas. Like everything is just extra large. Even the blocks appear to be larger than regular blocks.
Right, totally. It's like, it's just one hotel to go, and then it takes 20 minutes to walk there.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's a lot to see along all of the walks, right? Lots of people watching in Las Vegas.
Right, lots of people watching. So apart from people watching and trying to work out if we should get an Uber and where we can get it to stop, and running around and getting samples of doob tubes and all sorts of different fun things at the conference, Cody and I did a bunch of interviews on the sidelines of the conference. And so that's what we're going to be presenting to you this season. And what we kind of chose as our theme for this season is people are doing it who are doing it right when it comes to the space. And what we've ended up here, which I think is really cool, is a very varied selection of guests on the podcast. And I'd like, Cody, for you to introduce our first guest today. Since you actually did this interview, I think this was your first official interview that you ran for the podcast, right?
I know things are evolving so quickly. Absolutely. My first interview was with Otha Smith from Tetragram, and it was a really great first interview. I couldn't have met a friendlier guy. Just like so much of MJ BizCon, because I started in the cannabis industry really during the pandemic or just before. It's the first time I met the guy. Way taller than I expected. Pretty stout man in general. And so it was great to meet Otha. I was like, you are a large man. So, but the conversation went really smoothly. We really conversed around what Tetragram is, which is something that's aimed at serving patients and consumers so that they can really dial in cannabis, because cannabis medicine is super complicated and you need to really reflect on the way cannabis is affecting you if you want to optimize. So Tetragram is an app that is available all over the States, and it's growing into a really useful tool to optimize cannabis therapy.
Yeah, so I was also very excited. We've done a number of different collaborations with Otha in the past year and a half, had him on webinars.
With me,
quoted him on the web. Yeah, right, exactly. So super cool to meet him in person. Tell us a bit more about the interview. What did you two talk about?
Well, I think we really kind of focused in on why the app is needed and how it can be challenging for patients to really figure out what part of their therapeutic regimen or cannabis regimen is giving them relief. So journaling is an imperative part of improving your experience and figuring out what the chemotype, the chemical profile of the cannabis that you're using, and how that correlates to your experience. And Tetragram has integrated all of this. And so gathering that can be really helpful for, say, a patient like mine who I was recently dealing with, who really is kind of struggling to figure out the right cannabis regimen for them. And I've instituted a journaling method and actually recommended Tetragram as something for them to utilize. So it can just be a really valuable tool. And we know this. There's lots of competitors on the market coming out with similar tools, but we really like Tetragram and we really like Otha. So it was a good fit.
Yeah, we do, for sure. It's really so important. Something that I find myself saying over and over again is that no tool, whether it's, the tools we're developing on the Enigma or an app like Tetragram, no tool is going to make it so that you press a button and you know exactly the right type of cannabis for you to use. But maybe what it can do is kind of shorten the trial and error process and make it more effective. And that's what, I think the real value is here.
I think so. And I think that, the user interface being easy to access and it can help the user kind of log as they go along, and their experience is super valuable. So I think
definitely.
there's a value add for sure.
For sure. All right. So let's get straight to the interview, and make sure to stick around after the interview to listen to a special segment from our partners at ASA, Americans for Safe Access. Let's listen.
Well, here we are at the Cannabis Enigma Podcast. My name is Dr. Cody Peterson, and I'm here with Otha Smith, the founder of Tetragram, which we'll get into in a second. Nice to see you, Otha.
No, nice to see you as well. It's finally we get to meet in person. We've talked online for such a long period of time, so it's great to meet you in the flesh.
Well, I think that's one of the coolest things at MJ BizCon. That's why we're here, right, is to finally engage with these peers that we've developed relationships with. It's beautiful. This is my first podcast that I'm recording for the Cannabis Enigma Podcast. And it's really overwhelming almost to be around all these people and people that you've met on the internet. And like for you, for example, you walked up and I was like, you are taller than I expected.
Exactly right. Like I was talking to Stanley Atkins from the Cannamedic out of Atlanta, Georgia. And I was like, oh my God, like you're so much smaller than I anticipated, because you really never get an idea of a person's stature when they're online, and it's just like from the neck up, So it's really refreshing to see people for the first time in person. Yeah, it's just fascinating. I mean, the energy just changes once you're really in the realm of someone else,
It's wonderful. So that's why here at MJ BizCon, and we are in a hallway right now. So if you hear some background noise, definitely know that that's someone having a great time networking with their cannabis industry peers. So for our listeners out there, I wanted to let them know.
Yeah. A little disclaimer.
But I guess, why I'm really interested in talking to you is I have a patient right now. So I'm a practicing pediatric pharmacist, and I also have, some patients who come to me and want some advice on medical cannabis. One of the things we're struggling with right now is I'm not there, right? And I'm not involved with this patient every day. I mean, we've had some side effects, right? Some tachycardia and anxiety with our patient who's using medical cannabis. They're trying to fight cancer. It's sort of a last-ditch effort. We're not going to get into the weeds here, pun intended. But really, I guess what I'm getting at is I've really had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what part of the cannabis therapy that's setting them off, because they are using CBD, THC, and a number of other pharmaceuticals, right? Including some opioids and some other medications. So I guess that's the lead-in to what your app can do. You've heard of this problem before, is that correct?
100%. I hear it all the time. Yeah, I mean, that's really why we built Tetragram, because people are utilizing so many different various cannabis products. These cannabis products have what I call the T's and C's, the terpenes and cannabinoids associated with them. And so it's challenging as you navigate that landscape, because you go into a dispensary, there's hundreds of products to choose from. You don't know what's going to work, right for you, because given that it's federally illegal, no one has any type of guidance that they can rely on.
And it's overwhelming, right? The product selection you described is very real, and it rotates, right?
Yeah, and even, to make it even worse, like it goes batch by batch too, even about to be the same cultivator. So that's why we really developed Tetragram, so people can start to document not only the product, but we've designed the UX to really steer people to pay attention to those terpenes and cannabinoids, and then associated with a medical condition, so that over time, even if they're trying the same product but trying to use that product for a different symptom, they could draw conclusions on, okay, this might work for this, or that might work for that, because you really need to provide that type of documentation to understand what's going to work for you, because cannabis is a road that you travel alone. As we all know, we have different endocannabinoid systems, so everything's unique to ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And right now, in particular in cannabis, patients are traveling alone. They don't have access to a lot of healthcare professionals or, experts in this field. This is a new and emerging field, so that we really haven't provided patients with the model that serves them. And I think it sounds like, to me, Tetragram is one of the tools that patients can now use to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, I always display it like this. When you go to the doctor, you have a headache, or, you got into a bicycle accident, and you're like, oh, my leg is like really screwed up. He knows exactly what different products to recommend to you, right? And how does he do that? He says, all right, try these 2 products. I'm going to write it down in your little patient form, and then come back to me in a month, and then we'll see what the diagnosis is. Did it work for you? In cannabis, we are essentially the patient is creating their own blog and say, this is what I tried, because the doctor doesn't have that ability to do so. And then you circle back in a month or, a couple of days later after you tried that product, document your experience with it in order to draw the same conclusion. So we're running in parallels. Is this a little bit more cumbersome for us as we're in this industry that is federally illegal?
Makes everything more challenging.
Yeah.
Every step of the way, right?
100%. I mean, in this industry, I always equate myself to like that newborn who's always fighting to stay awake, because in this industry, the minute you wake up the next morning, something has changed. So it's like you always want to keep your finger on the dial to try to figure out what's going on and, what's the next new exciting news. I read a lot of the reports that you publish on LinkedIn, and it's very insightful. So I appreciate your work as well.
Oh, thank you. It's all about the endocannabinoid system for me. And
100%.
That's why, your app, Tetragram, and apps like it, the tools empowering patients to try to figure out what's going on with them. Mm-hmm. You mentioned everyone has a unique endocannabinoid system. It changes through the day. We know that your endocannabinoid system is different in the morning than it is in the afternoon. Right. This is why the wake and bake feels very different than the nighttime session. And anyone who's done this can pretty much attest, whoa, there's something different in the morning.
Yeah, because I'm one of those, if I cannot get up and wake and bake, it completely just changed the trajectory of my entire day. But, to your point also, it's when you eat an edible, if you eat an edible by itself, empty stomach, you're only probably going to absorb, more better than anyone, 12 to 14%. But the minute you take that same edible and put it with a fatty food, then you get double the exposure. So, there's just so many nuances associated with it. And that's why it's really exciting to be here today.
That's why we need to write it down. It's essentially what you're saying.
100%. And so, with version 2 that we anticipate the launch in Q1, we're going to include a lot more of those lifestyle aspects so that, people can paint a clearer picture, not just about what product you're using, what were those T's and C's, how did you consume the product, but more importantly, what was your lifestyle about that day? Like we were talking about earlier, did you have breakfast? Did you have lunch? And then take that particular product?
Yeah, so much is going on with the endocannabinoid system, and so much what we do can stimulate it. And that stimulation causes a release of our own endocannabinoids, sometimes anyway, depends on what we're doing. And those interact, they cross over with our THC and CBD and all these other cannabinoids, and it changes the effects, right? And then you throw terpenes into the mix, right? And there's 30,000 of them. Right. Only 30 are right. Cannabis. But this is an incredibly difficult problem that eventually we're going to have to basically leverage computers to solve, in my humble opinion. So I guess that's my question as I wanted to go. So I think we've established to folks that Tetragram is an app that is helping patients record their cannabis experience, their symptoms, what cannabis variety they're doing. If you haven't downloaded it yet, do it right now. We have 20 minutes left of this podcast. So
yeah, please do at the Apple Store or Google Play at Tetragram app. And so that's the first version that we released, which is this really skyrocketed. We just wanted to build with this MVP with the essence of giving people the ability to document that information. But in version 2, a couple of things that I can share is definitely just, like we talked about, incorporating other parts of their lifestyle, eventually getting to a point where we can include their medical records. And so whatever prescription pills they're on currently, we can have that correlation of data to say, okay, now they're starting to use cannabis. What's that mingling effect like? Because as we know, states that have become legal, prescription pills and opioid usage drops dramatically. And so we can capture that. I think that would be phenomenal.
I think tracking that is so important for our progress in the cannabis movement, right? Both recreational and adult. We need to prove on the recreational side that this isn't heroin and it's not killing people, and we're not creating an equivalent opioid epidemic, which I think it's kind of ridiculous that we have to prove this, considering cannabis use has been widespread for many, many years.
Right.
But okay, we got to prove it. Let's at least, start to gather the data so we can leverage to lawmakers and say, look, shut up and legalize. The flip side to that is we also need to start gathering big data around patient outcomes, diseases, medication interactions, and also what cannabis can do to help reduce medication use, because we know pharmaceuticals just generally carry a higher risk to benefit profile. So all of that is great. But I guess my question and what I wanted to get to today is, what would you like to be your data and the data of other, companies working in that space, like what do you think that we can achieve with some of this big data? Like just a couple, like.
Oh man, how much time do we got? I mean, a number of things.
Give me the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, like with the data that we collect, I always say it not only helps improve that process for the patient, but also improves the general understanding for the industry. So when we look at the aggregate data that we collect, if we look at dispensaries, for example, some what they're called to bud tenders are more knowledgeable than others, but they're practicing medicine at the end of the day. And so we can give them information that says, you have 50 products on your shelf and there's 8,000 or 10,000 reviews associated saying that this aggregate data is helping them with PTSD or fibromyalgia, then that really changes the conversation, especially when federal legalization happens and, everyone's going to be selling the same cookies at some point. The more knowledge we have so that we can steer that person in the right direction is going to be huge because, at the end of the day, cannabis isn't cheap. And if you try all these different products and you still haven't met the one that meets your profile, it could be challenging. But also with the data is, helping the cultivators, helping the CPG companies that produce these products, but really have no understanding about what the actual effect of it is.
So helping them narrow in on what their products are doing.
Exactly.
In the field.
Yeah, and you've seen it, Cody. Like they're out in the marketplace and they're like, from a marketing perspective, like this is for being energized. This is for creativity. What data are you using to really say that?
The answer is none. I'm shaking my head.
Exactly, right?
Over here.
And then lastly, I'll just say, the data can establish the first ranking system in this industry. There might be 20,000 people growing Blue Dream, but these 20,000 are going to be inherently different. Some of it's not even going to be Blue Dream. So the ones that consumers have said, this has been very beneficial. Let's find out why. And then that will help other people look at those terpenes and cannabinoids to understand that better.
I love it. Yeah. So what are those challenges to getting that data? It sounds like we can do some really big things with it. So what have you seen as the challenges to acquiring that data? And then maybe let's touch on anonymity. And so that interested parties who are considering downloading your app don't feel like they're about to, sign up for a wiretap.
Yeah, 100%. So, first and foremost, when it comes to the privacy, I'm a patient. My two business partners are patients. So we went through every length to make sure that our data stays secure for our consumer. When it comes to downloading the app, we'll never ask for your first or last name. None of those unique identifiers. In version 2, we will ask if you want to provide age, sex, race, stuff like that. Just to gather more metric data.
It builds the data set. It really, especially when we know there's really strong sex-based differences between how men and women react to cannabis. It's clearly established in the scientific data. So having that piece of information really helps you kind of, put your data in buckets.
Exactly. So, and what was the other question?
We talked about anonymity, and then what are your challenges in obtaining data?
So the challenge really is, like most people in this industry from a business perspective, how do you reach that end consumer? Because Instagram, Facebook, they're very limiting in terms of what words you can use, what pictures you can use. So I'm very grateful through the relationships that we have with dispensaries who are saying, they used to promote paperback journals saying, keep track of what you're using. Now they're promoting Tetragram and saying, hey, this is much easier for you to document your experiences. So that's been very beneficial. But the number one challenge in this industry, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, is gathering the COA information, understanding the lab results with every product that's out there, because that's a big part of Tetragram that we want to automate for the consumer. So they're not sitting there manually entering in all the terpenes and cannabinoids if they have access to it.
You mean this is crazy? Your some terpene reports are coming out parts per million, and now you're expecting patients to convert parts per million to milligrams per gram and try to calculate what their dose was. They put a little pinch in there. Like, I can see that being a really big challenge. Plus, every state has different regulatory requirements on terpenes, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very fortunate that, and I thought I'd never say it, but Maryland did it right in the sense that it was legislated that all terpenes and cannabinoid information had to be on the product. One of the things that I'm also seeing is that cultivators, CPG companies are now including a QR code that takes that customer directly to the COA. And so we really need to understand, that life cycle of that product before it got entered into my hands. I want to know the clear picture so that we can really draw these conclusions more effectively.
Yeah.
So standardization is something that we all need in this industry. It's the biggest pain point.
And if we could standardize the way that which terpenoids are tested, which cannabinoids are tested, how they're resulted, now we could easily develop some sort of software to convert that and then associate it with the product in your software or others. And now all of a sudden we can build that bigger, deeper, more robust data that's really needed to drive forward the outcomes that we talked about before.
Yeah, because I will always say, like, you know, the industry, these regulatory bodies within each state that's legalized for medical or recreational, they put the testing labs as the police of the industry, but it's a private institution, right? So, you know, there's always, and as you know, some situations where test numbers are coming back wrong, and
manipulated,
manipulated,
falsified.
Exactly. We won't get into the specifics more, but we understand the game that's being played, and so, you know, who's testing the testing labs, right? So I really think, and what I've started to see in Maryland is that, like, Maryland is actually going to have their own state-ran testing lab, so that every testing facility that is utilized has to send that to them to get final approval. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Because if you look at, like, the privatization of jails, that never works and never would. And we're kind of got that same similarity in cannabis when it comes to these testing labs.
Right. We've got someone who we've let an unregulated market that's incentivized by these manipulations or these higher THC numbers, and they have no standards set for their baseline,
right?
And no one's enforcing any sort of regulation or standardization. So you're spot on with that. I think that is a big challenge, but I think there's a lot of focus on fixing that. So with cannabis reforms, California is doing something very similar. I don't know if they've announced this yet, but I think that UCSD is teaming up with the Board of Cannabis Control, and they're going to do a joint venture to make sure, once again, they can be testing these products that they find either in the illicit market or that they find, and that the state can have like an analytical lab dedicated and who's focused on these measures. So that thing that Maryland's doing is spreading. And I think that brings me to the next question I had, which is cannabis reforms. And this is something that I'm writing about at the Enigma, or I just wrote about. There's been a lot of talk on banking. There's been the COAO, the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, something like that. And then, of course, we have these other bills that have come through in recent years. So what are you hopeful about in the next 2 years? Do you expect things to go full federally? And how does that affect your business model at Tetragram?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say, like, federal reform probably isn't going to happen for another 6-7 years. I don't think it's going to happen that soon because, I mean, you just look at the timetable. Like, if Biden gets reelected, there might be a possibility he'll, start to put some attention on that.
Once he's safe.
Yeah, exactly. But, COVID is still a real thing. And I think that's, the priority of a lot of people who, run the country. But it'll be interesting to see what plays out. I also caution people to be very careful when they ask about federal legalization. I believe federal legalization needs to happen, but it needs to be structured in a way that states continue to do it independently, in my personal opinion.
Okay.
Just because, cannabis is a commodity at the end of the day. And so if you let interstate commerce happen where people can just transport tons of cannabis across the country.
Quite literally tons.
Yeah.
It could be.
Exactly. You're going to see a lot of the smaller companies that aren't well capitalized. How are they going to survive in that market when that commodity of, $45 to $60 per eighth drops to like $10, $12? So I think it takes it streamlines it in the sense that it's going to be real corporate America. Like, I don't want to buy weed from Walmart, So
try not to buy anything from Walmart, but definitely not my weed.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think it's keep it state ran, but just let it be federally legal at that point.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm going to have to throw my own opinion here because I have a very strong opinion in this space. So I agree cannabis is a commodity and can be treated like a commodity, but I also think it's medicine.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and I know we agree on that.
Yeah.
So in my mind, the ideal layout is we separate out that sort of medical market. We start using data like the data that you're collecting, and we start showing it to insurers, and we say, look here, I've reduced your medication dependence. We've improved patient outcomes, opioid deaths. By the way, 90,000 individuals still died from the opioid epidemic this year in America.
Yeah.
So we still have a very clear problem there. So I think if we can sort of separate out those markets and continue to use data like the ones that you're gathering to do it, then we're going to serve the market better. Adults should freely use cannabis, but patients should have their medical rights protected, which includes access to consistent products so they can get consistent outcomes.
Exactly. 100%. the medical market. And that's the thing that scares me. We have more states coming on recreational that were once medical. A lot of people are like, well, the medical does take a hit initially, but over time through education, I've seen it firsthand where people like come into the dispensary. I'm an adult user. And then, the first thing we ask is like, okay, so what are you looking for cannabis? What do you want to do with it? I want to sleep. Bingo, you are a patient.
I got some knee pain.
Exactly.
Okay.
You are a patient. And so like my personal perspective is anybody that uses cannabis is a patient in my eyes, which is why any of our marketing material, which I'll never change, Tetragram was built for patients by patients. And that's the way we view it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think my personal opinion, again, this is not necessarily the view of the Enigma, is that's true. People use it, but there's a lot of both, right? People definitely getting high.
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you that most patients or almost every user has a medical need that they're also secondarily probably using cannabis for. But so not a disagreement, I guess, probably semantics. But Otha, this has been absolutely amazing. We didn't even get too many loud walker buys.
Yeah, I know. It worked out great. You guys picked a great location.
We got it we're very deep in a corner. We went as deep into a corner as they have here at this giant convention center. But where can people find you? What should they check out? What do they need to do? And
download the Tetragram app at our website at tetragramapp.com. You can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn at the Tetragram app, and version 2 is on the way in early Q1. So I can't spill the beans because stealth is wealth in this industry, but some really great things coming.
I look forward to using it.
Yeah, look forward to talking further with you and getting your feedback on it as well.
For sure, will do. Thanks, Otha.
Thank you.
So for our regulation segment today, I'm here with Debbie Chogai, who is the Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access. Hey, Debbie.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Great to chat with you as always. So today we're going to talk about federal medical cannabis access around the globe. What do you have to tell us and our listeners today?
So I think people are really surprised when I tell people that there are currently 44 countries across the globe that provide federal medical cannabis access, and the United States is not one of them. The United States is really falling behind many other countries when it comes for providing access to medical cannabis to everyone. As you know, there are 37 states that have some form of access, but federally, we're still far behind in providing access to everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So I know that you at ASA, this is what you do. This is what you're working towards. Can you tell us a little bit about, where we're headed and what you're working on at the moment in this space?
Sure. Well, we're doing a little bit of both. We're trying to provide better access in the states that do have programs. But at the same time, we're also trying to get federal oversight so that people can travel across state lines and so that they can use any type of medicine, no matter where they live across the country, and be able to access the same types of medicines that people have if you live in New York or California or Texas or Florida, to be able to have that same access of medicine that's available. We're trying to provide standardized access for patients across the country like other countries do.
Okay, yeah, super important. How far away do you think we are from the goal?
Well, a lot of people are talking about legalization, and they've been talking about legalization for many, many years, and everybody thinks that it's right around the corner. But we've been advocating for now 20 years. And when we first started, we thought it would just take 2 years because it seems like something that, people deserve to have safe access to cannabis. But it's been taking a lot longer. And while a lot of people are talking about adult use legalization, ASA is really focused on medical cannabis legalization because we know that pediatric patients need access and we want doctor education, we want research. And so for us, we are looking at federal medical cannabis access.
All right. Yeah. Super important goal. Thanks for the update, Debbie. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
I'm Alana Goldberg. This episode of the Cannabis Enigma podcast was executive produced by myself with production assistance from Dr. Cody Peterson and Ed Weissman and edited by our friends at We Edit Podcasts. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to like, rate, and share. It helps other people find the podcast, and it's really nice for us as well.